Okay, and we're on. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Research Ed US. My name is Eric Kalenz. Welcome to our first live online event in the US. We tried this in the UK and got a lot of really great feedback and many viewers tuning in to learn over the spring and summer. And so we're doing our best to replicate it here. I do want to just thank you all for coming. I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about what Research Ed is in case you're very new to it. But Research Ed is a purely grassroots international community of teachers, leaders, thought leaders, administrators, just seeking to really build the research literacy of the entire education profession and to make us a more evidence-based profession. And to really look at our practices through those lenses of what has a sound evidence base and what doesn't, and really get people talking about that, networking, sharing resources and things like that. I've been involved with the organization for about 5 years when I spoke at some conferences over in the UK and then asked the founder if we could somehow try to do it here on a regular basis in the US. And it's been thrilling to watch it grow over that time. Obviously, we're here in an online environment because though we had something scheduled for Philadelphia in October, the pandemic had something to say about that. So we're going to try this virtually. If you've looked at the site, you have probably seen how it lays out, and that's that we're not going to ask people to attend 3-4 hours a day like they would a live conference. Instead, we have the conference broken into 5 thematic veins, and each one will feature a live discussion like the panel you're about to see here, plus a series of pre-recorded videos that I worked with presenters across the country, across the world to send to me, and those will be available for you and your staffs as you kind of work on that PD toolkit for this year. I mean, that's a big thing that we kept in mind in designing this is a lot of schools are going to be attempting to go back and do business in a very different way in the fall. And they're going to be needing resources and some recommendations from folks who think about this all the time that they can widely share and they can conveniently share among staff. And so we hope to really outfit that toolkit over the next 5 days. I just have to say a few things about thank yous. In case you're wondering, no one got paid for any of this. Okay, so every single presenter you will see over the next 5 days took out of their own time to prepare presentations, to record those presentations, to receive lots and lots of emails from someone like me asking them if they're on time, if they're still on, and they very generously gave their time and expertise. And I can't thank them enough. Everything about this is purely just people who care a lot about helping a field in need. That's it. And so I just can't say enough to my presenters. Thank you so much. You're adding so much to all of us right now. Also, I had some great helpers along the way. I'm going to call a few out by name. Jasmine Lane, who's my good buddy here in the Twin Cities, helped me with all kinds of promotion and just bouncing ideas off of her. So thank you, Jasmine, just for that. Definitely Helene Galden O'Shea, who's kind of the co-founder of Research Ed in the UK, sat with me and helped me with tech concerns and getting me running on Zoom and things like that. Though I'd done a lot of it, I'd never done any webinars, so a disclaimer is coming there, by the way, before we actually get going. And then finally, I want to thank my pal, the founder of Research Ed, Tom Bennett, just for letting us really use Research Ed and kind of make it in the American image and bring on American voices and really create an event that's really geared for the moment. Okay, this is a very special moment and complicated, and that we had the latitude to really design it in this way. Just my hat is off to Tom for starting the organization and for letting us really kind of take it where we feel it needed to go in this time. That all said, I am ready to turn over to these fine folks that you see here. Our moderator is Josh Starr, and he will kind of get into the introductions of everybody else. But before he does, I just wanted to lay down some norms. I'm planning basically to and we've talked here about just how it should work. And that will be, this panel will go until a natural stop till about 40 minutes. Okay, around the 40-minute mark, we're going to kind of break things up, and I will have been harvesting, fielding questions kind of backstage that we'll kind of sort through and hopefully connect to points in the discussion that you hear. Okay, so we probably won't get to everybody's questions, obviously, but if you have some, that's the reason this interactive opportunity exists, is for folks to actually ask their direct concerned questions of the folks assembled. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way, mute myself, and listen, and monitor your Q&A and write down questions, and turn it over to Josh Starr. Thanks for everybody for showing up, and please keep following. Thanks. Josh.
All right, thank you, Eric. Before we kick off, I want to thank you for not only having us, but also the work you're doing. Bridging research and policy and practice is at the heart of great change, and we need more folks doing it. And when we see teachers doing it and leading that work, it becomes that much more powerful. So I just really appreciate everything you've been doing, and this opportunity to kind of share some things that this panel and some experts and folks have to say about assessment and what it looks like next year. Just to everybody out there, so you have everybody in front of you. I'm not going to read all their bios. You have it. Follow them on Twitter, right? Follow them on LinkedIn. You'll see, we have some great people who agreed to join me today. I'm gonna kick it off with a couple of comments, and then we're just going to go into the conversation, and then I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. When COVID started, when this crisis started, my team and I were sitting around, well, when I say we're talking about like what's going to be happening in the fall. And everybody, of course, is talking about reopening, which is, of course, the complexity of that. As as a former superintendent, and Paul can talk about it, like it's crazy making, it's unbelievable what people are dealing with in terms of thinking about the immediacy of coming back. And I started thinking about, okay, yes, and there's a teaching and learning question. Like once you figure out what to do, how to get everybody back in or keep them out or whatever it may be, what we look like physically or virtually, then what do we do with them when we lost a quarter of the year, when we have summer slide, when we're coming back with teacher anxiety and adult anxiety as well as kid anxiety, when there are all these real questions around teaching and learning. And as a former accountability guy and a former superintendent, I always used to think about, the data, right? And it helps you do two things: name names and ask better questions. At best, the data helps you ask better questions. So we started thinking, well, what then is assessment going to look like in next year, right? We've been 20 years, we've been doing plan, do, study, act, right? 20 years, we've been doing school improvement teams. 20 years, we've been doing sort of very similar things to good effect and ill effect, right? You can debate that, we're not going to today. But like, how do we think about a new era of assessment? How do we think about a new era of curriculum compacting? How do we think about differentiation? There's so many things to think about. So we decided to build on some of the work we've done at PDK, both in the magazine, by creating a bundle. If you go to pdkintl.org, you can find our bundle. We just pulled what we thought would be six or seven useful evidence-based resources that practitioners can use to assess. We also have a micro-credential through our Educators Rising platform on formative assessment. So let's just put it out there and run it up a flagpole, see if the wind picks it up. These are 4 of the wonderful people who said, hey, this is really interesting, let's talk more about it. That's why I'm doing this panel. We said that this is something that's important to get out there to help think about what assessment looks like. And I think that, frankly, there's no real one answer to any of this. A lot of what we're going to have to figure out next year is how to engage with each other around these really difficult questions, right? And I'm thinking about 4 main questions, kind of the problem we're trying to solve. Do that, and then I'll turn it over to the panel. It seems like there are 4 areas. One is measuring student progress. Like, how do we know how our kids are doing relative to standards, right? Second is consistency. How do we know this consistency within schools, among teachers, among schools, right? If we're no longer using state standardized tests, perhaps we're no longer even using district common assessments, or if things like MAP may be limited, right? And saying maybe, how do we create consistency among across schools? Then one of the most important issues is adjusting instruction, right? Teachers adjust instruction every day based on assessment, formal, informal assessment, whatever it may be, assessment of learning as well as assessment for learning. How do we adjust instruction when we're in a virtual space? And then most importantly, underpinning all of this, equity, right? How do we make sure that we are not using results of assessments to limit opportunities for some kids? I'm really concerned about retracking kids. And how do we make sure that kids who are quite vulnerable are getting the supports they need? None of the resources I put forward speak to this in terms of the new doing it virtually, right? They're all really good in the old world. So what does it look like in the new world? So the panel today, coming from the great expertise they have at the school district level, at the classroom level, at the state level, at the sort of national partner level, are going to talk about these issues, large and small. I want to talk about, there's a real sort of policy systems component around this, but there's also a real practical day-to-day instructional component as well that I think we can speak to. You see who all the panelists are. Let me first start with this, and whoever wants to jump in can. I laid out those 4 areas, right? Measuring progress, consistency, adjusting instruction, equity. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Did I miss one? Right? Is there something you want to add to any of it? And I will let any of you just jump in on that, and make sure you take yourself off mute and jump in on any of those. Which of those 4 do you think are most important? Did I miss something? What do you think? Lauren,
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, Melissa.
Melissa Spadin, I'm in San Diego. I work at the county level, which here is in between districts and the state. For me, I think I see equity as kind of the overarching umbrella for all of these other pieces, because we want to do all of these different things with equity in mind. So for us, I think we're thinking most about what are our students' needs, both, technology, access to instruction, but also all of those other needs that may impede their progress, that may impede their learning, and really planning everything else with that equity in mind overall. So helping teachers know what students are dealing with, focusing on that social emotional learning, their well-being, their family mental health, whether they have a space to even complete the work, getting in front of all of the technological needs that we end up talking about. And I think if we start with really understanding our students and what's happening in their homes, then I think a lot of these other pieces end up happening in a more well thought out way. I'll let someone else continue the thought.
I'm going to push on that and hopefully this surprise someone else. So yes, and we have to make sure that our kids are achieving standards. Paul, you're a superintendent, right? You are accountable for kids continuing to make progress towards standards, and everything Melissa described is important, but it's a yes and.
But you're absolutely right. There are 3 components in my mind to this, even taking away teacher prep and their ability to navigate all of this. Part of this is around safety. So we've spent the morning, my administrative team, looking at the possibilities of remote learning versus coming back in hybrid in some capacity. So there's the safety piece that goes along with that. There's the equity piece, that social emotional component that you were just mentioning, but there's also the instruction as well. And so we're looking at the fact that our students lost 3 months of instruction from last year. They've had 6 months off from school, and they're coming back to a new school year. And even if we take out that kind of larger scale assessment piece of it, the state standards and the state assessment, just thinking about what students have to cover in a traditional year has now changed. Because as the classroom teacher, I have to take the students from a very different place than where they normally come to me at the beginning of the year. And then I have far less time this year to get them to the end point that I need them to be at. So our staff, before we even get back to school, is going to spend a lot of time with curriculum compacting and looking at that kind of work and figuring out how we can do some very quick and simple assessments as the year begins to learn where our students are at, so we know where we have to focus our time and where we can move along quickly. And I think it's going to build into differentiated instruction at that point. I think we're going to have to create some kind of sub-learning that happens because they're all going to be coming back with different starting points. And to get them to where they need to be at the end of the year, we're going to need to know who's got what skills and how we can laser focus our time to catch them up so that by the end of the year, they're all where we need them to be or where their families and they expect to be, all while thinking about the social emotional aspects.
All right, so Lauren, you are a teacher of the year. You're clearly an expert, right? You know your stuff. But when you hear that and you think about, I mean, I imagine, all the teachers I've been talking to are kind of stressed about going back, right? Not only their own health, but they're just thinking about like how to manage everything. And now you hear someone saying, well, we got to do a little more, right? We got to assess in different ways. And how do you think about that just from the teacher perspective, the actual reality of assessing where kids are academically while also putting that within the context of where they are emotionally, physically, and everything else? What's the teacher response to that? And then I'm going to go to you on that, Kristin.
My blood pressure goes up, my heart rate quickens. So that's the most honest answer, is that I don't think that I have a clear, tidy answer I could give. But I will say that to Paul's point, I think as I think about those first couple weeks of school, for instance, I think about sort of these two tandem goals. One, which is a lot of what Melissa talked about, and I tend to agree that I think equity is sort of the umbrella that touches all of these other problems. To think about the social and emotional pieces for my kids. They've been through trauma. How am I going to create space for that? How am I going to attend to that component of their school experience? But then also to Paul's point, how do I concurrently provide opportunities that will feel not overwhelming or condemning to kids to show me what they know and where they are? So I don't want assessment at the beginning of the year to feel like, well, you should know this and you should have learned this back in April, but rather how do I open that up so it's more of an opportunity, right? To demonstrate where you are, and wherever you are is great. And we're going to move on from there. So as I think about those first couple weeks of school, I'm trying to manage those tandem goals to set myself up and to set my kids up for a year that, to Paul's point, is going to be gnarly no matter what.
So Kristin, you're working more at sort of the national level around this, right? A lot of deep expertise in assessment. What are you seeing around this in terms of like maybe how, if you have any examples of how any folks that you're working with are approaching this? I know people also want concrete tools around it. So what are you seeing at the national level with some of the folks you're working with?
Yeah, well, I want to start out, can you hear me okay? I want to start out by just saying that I feel so much sympathy for folks like Lauren and Melissa and Paul who are working in our districts. You guys are truly warriors, and thank you. And in my perspective, and I talk with a lot of district leaders and a lot of at that level, and a lot of principals, and what we've got to do is we've got to protect instructional time at all costs and support our teachers in this unprecedented situation. And so what I'm seeing that bothers me is false dichotomies that are emerging in the literature, because one of you have already said it. It's a very nuanced answer to this question. It's not a one size fits all. Districts are very different and from each other, and even within a district, what Lauren needs as a teacher differs to help with individual students, differs from what is needed to think about the classroom as a whole, which is different than what a principal needs, which is different than what a district administrator needs. So I think that when it comes to assessment, I'm really borrowing this notion that the Center for Assessment, if you guys are familiar with that organization, they're saying, let's stop thinking about labels and let's focus on what is your need, what is your purpose, and what is the highest quality assessment that you can obtain to meet that particular need. And let's not assess for any other purpose than what can help us maximize instructional time. So that's the conversation that I'm really hoping not to have just today, but tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next.
So let me build on that and ask just straight up, is there a role for the traditional standardized tests this year? And by standardized tests, I mean state tests, or I mean something like a map, you know, that might be diagnostic a few times a year. I'm not talking about perhaps a district common assessment or an end of unit, you know, consistent end of unit test, but like the typical standardized test. Is there a role for it this year? And if so, what is that role?
I would say, I'll answer quickly and then we can, I would say that for those my personal opinion, there is not a role for statewide testing until spring 2021. And then we can, you know, each state is going to have to make their own decision about what, that just feels so far in the future right now.
So next semester though, you're saying this year there should be state tests.
I'm saying each state would need to make their own decision, right? I mean, it's just so different. I would like there to be some accountability in spring 21 at the state level. That's my personal opinion, but every state is so different. I don't know what's going to be happening in each state in the spring, or, you know, so I think it's a hard question to answer now.
So Melissa, how do you think, oh, I'm sorry, Kristin.
Oh yeah, but in the fall, is there a role for standardized testing such as a MAP or an iReady or a Starr? And I do work for iReady, so I need to be disclosure about that. I think it all depends on the district's needs. Look at the reports, look at the inferences and the interpretations that you can make from the reports. And if the reports help you make surgical decisions about instruction, then the answer is yes. If the reports are just data that can be aggregated and passed up the line so that, you know, big statements can be made, maybe not. I think that, you know, we have to prioritize instructional time and the types of instructional decisions that folks like Lauren have to make above all else.
All right, so I'm going to go Melissa, then Paul, then Lauren. So Melissa, you're working at the state level, right? Quasi at the county level. I mean, I've been at the state level before, so have that perspective. What do you think the role, if any, of the kind of traditional standardized test should be this year?
Well, I think my favorite new phrase is decision-driven data collection. Right. So for me, it's thinking about Dylan William, I'll credit him with that, decision-driven data collection. So for me, it's thinking about what decisions are you trying to make? We support 42 districts here in San Diego County. We have charters. We have districts from the size of San Diego Unified to 42 students in one district. So for me, it's thinking about what information is that MAP iReady, that larger scale standardized sort of test going to give you? And then at the classroom level, what are you going to be able to do with both that information and maybe a performance assessment that you have a kid do to demonstrate what knowledge they're coming in with? There are a lot of really simple ways of doing that. Maybe even students creating something new that demonstrates their knowledge or what they learned over the spring or did not get to learn. And then thinking about what are some of the school level sort of assessments that can be done, whether we have, you know, our school psychologists or do we have diagnostics? So for me, it's looking at the different levels. The state standardized, I have no say over that. I'm not at the state level anymore. And but for me, it's thinking about what knowledge can we gain and what can we put in the teacher's hands to make decisions the second school starts, because it's already happened for some of our districts here. School's already started. Some are pushing back so they can have a little bit more time, but there's a lot of free resources out there, free performance assessment tools, so that students can help us understand what they know and what they're able to do, because that able to do part is really hard to assess right now with the technology potentially being a hindrance as well.
So Paul, can you talk about this question both from managing the district, right, getting the schools what they need, supporting, but also you have to manage out, you have to manage your community, you have to show the board and the parents and the community the kind of progress they're making. So can you talk about this issue of state standardized tests, the traditional standardized tests, and the role they should play this year from both managing in and managing out perspective? What role should they play at all, if any?
So it's interesting. I want to come back actually to what my colleagues have said, and I think that any assessment that is not going to help the teacher directly in the classroom at this point to maximize learning and to move the students as far and as fast as possible are assessments that we need to take off the table right now. Now, I'm saying that as a personal perspective. I certainly don't I don't believe that the state has moved in the direction that I'm going to say right now, but in each spring, we spend so much time coordinating state assessments to look and see how well we have mastered the state standards. I have so much less learning time this year, and I have so much more learning that has to happen in a smaller amount of time. The amount of time that we would spend doing those assessments for an end of the year review of what we've accomplished, to me this year, I would like to move that off. And I want to be very honest. When we had the conversations with the staff, and a lot of the conversations we're having this point around how to reopen are combined combinations between the administration and the teachers. We're all sitting together at the table trying to talk about all of the problems and issues. One of the worries that becomes very clear are the teachers' concerns about how they manage those state assessments. We always disaggregate that data. There's always conversation about how our students are doing on those state assessments. And I think teachers put a great deal of pressure on themselves to measure how they've done or how they think others perceive they've done based on those state assessments. And so I think we have to do a good job explaining to the community that this is not a year that those state assessments really tell us what we think they're going to tell us. And we need to kind of move those aside and spend the time on teaching and learning instead, and take that pressure off the teachers, because we need them to be more creative than ever before. And we're putting so much more pressure on them. And if they feel like somebody's going to be looking at how effective they were, whether it's through the evaluation process or through the state assessment process, that's going to squash some of the creativity that we need so much for them to have. And so I think we have to keep that in mind as well. I'm also concerned about AP exams and, you know, all of the SATs and all of those things. I'm a middle school and high school district. We're regional. And so all of our focus is preparing our students for when they leave us. So we have all of those components that we have to look at as well. Some of those I'm also hoping will kind of be moved to the side a little bit, so that our students can focus on what they really need to learn in those APs rather than focusing on preparing for the exam at the end.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah, kidding, huh?
Yeah, well, you know, my daughter is going off to college this year. My older son is a senior this year, and then my youngest is at middle school. And seeing the role of APs, SATs, ACTs, it's crazy. Lauren, your blood pressure just went up because I just heard that you are not only expected to do everything, but now you're expected to be more creative, right? So, right?
Yeah, I gotta go. I gotta get off this panel. There's too much to do.
Yeah, I know. Well, so it's kind of like a bye year, right? And right, like you have a bye weekend, but it's kind of like a bye year, right? But at the same time, there's this level of expectation. So what's the role, if any, of the kinds of standardized tests that have been the floor? At the very least, they've been the floor for decision making. If unfortunately, in too many places, they're the ceiling. But it's, you know, they are part of what we do. That's not there anymore. How do you and your fellow teachers think about what role they should or should not play? What are you scared of in not having them, and what are the opportunities?
Yeah, so I think that the question for me is less about whether or not there should be standardized tests. The question is more about what is the purpose of the standardized test, right? So if this is a test that, to Paul's point, and frankly, in my state, our summative assessment really is for accountability. It's not, that's not really data that's being parsed by the classroom teacher to help them next year. It's the summative assessment for the kids and for the teacher. So that's more often sort of weaponized, right? That's more often used as something to say who's going to be a turnaround school and who goes on the list and what teachers, you know, need to do this, that, or the other. So if that's the purpose of a standardized test, to Paul's point, I think that's a different conversation this year because of the amount of learning that needs to happen in the same 9 months of the year. However, I mean, all standardized tests are not created equal. There might be standardized tests that are more appropriate to be given earlier in the year or at, you know, end of quarter, end of semester, whatever, to give, again, teachers help with teaching and learning so that are actually helping us meet the primary function of why we're in school, which is, I think, teaching kids, and less about shaking our finger at schools and at teachers on the end of the year assessment. So I would think less about standardized tests and more about the purpose of whatever type of assessment we're instituting and how it will be used.
Right. So Lauren, I'm going to stick with you because I want to get specific and go back to something actually I think Melissa brought her up in the beginning. We know that there are all these non-instructional factors that we need to incorporate into our understanding of how kids are doing relative to their academic standards. And those are present, you know, regardless of whether we're virtual or not, and they are, you know, multiplied by a factor of 100 this year, whether it's Wi-Fi, whether it's the economic uncertainty, whether it is, you know, health issues. There's so many different concerns that we have to take into account. So what kind of practical steps can teachers and schools take to incorporate those into our responsibility to also assess kids relative to their learning, right? Like, what's the advice that you would give to try to help teachers do that so they can show parents, they can show their superintendents and principals and others that, like, there's all this other stuff that we have to understand when we're also measuring progress.
So I think this is such a great question because it is something that is in such stark relief following our fourth quarter national experiment in online learning. So two things come to mind. One is that teachers need to be, in a practical sense and in a systematic way, setting up forums to understand each child's situation. So in that's distance learning, I sent out a Friday Feels survey on Google Forms where kids would talk to me about the barriers they were experiencing that week, struggles they were going through, whether it was related to school or not. So creating some sort of open forum. I did lots of one-on-one conferences with kids, and all of that is good teaching practice, but as you say, is magnified in a distance learning situation. So teachers need to be investing in those kinds of open conversations and relationships with students and families so that they know, first of all, what those barriers are. If we don't know what they are, we're going to be less equipped to handle them. The second piece that I think can help in terms of, as you say, assessing learning and helping kids stay on track is really having a laser focus on standards. So I think distance learning highlighted so much, like we're taking points off for late work, or you didn't have your camera on, or you weren't respectful. Like, no, we need to be focusing on the standards and getting kids to those standards. If it takes that kid a week longer, that's okay. We know what's going on in their home situation. We need to be adapting and saying, but this is the bar that you're gonna get to, and we're gonna help you, we're gonna personalize it. And if we stay laser focused on the standards and on the learning targets, I think that will help us sort of negotiate the non-academic factors that are influencing a kid while still pushing them towards the targets.
So I'm glad you brought up standards, and I want other people to also respond to what Lauren said in that question. But I've also been thinking a lot about power standards. I remember going through the power standards process before, and it seems like it's had some dips and, you know, it kind of resurges. But it feels to me like this year, the notion of power standards is more important than ever before, because we can't do everything. And the need to say, this is actually the most important thing, or here's a set of the most important things, forget about the rest, is incredibly important for teachers as well as for kids and parents and community. So I'd love for you all to talk about power standards in relation to assessment, or standards in general, as well as some of the specific techniques that Lauren mentioned. Anybody can jump in on that.
I'll go ahead. So we kind of disagree with the idea of saying these standards are more important than the others at the county office. We talk about essential learnings, right? And so we think about this, basically you have to really understand the standards themselves, which we've taken years to do that, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and understand how they interrelate. So if you're looking at mathematics, I mean, you can't say that you have all of the standards for mathematical practices. Those are all important. And then thinking about that, how would you decide which standards are more important than others? Instead, looking at what those essential learnings are that come from there, what the important concepts are overall. But we really shy away and stay away from talking about essential standards or essential or power standards. And so all of our work at the county and our curriculum and instruction has been around creating integrated units and looking at how we can ensure that we're integrating the concepts, integrating the standards, and also the skills that they'll need across the curriculum, no matter the content area, so that whatever's happening, at least they're getting that continued support. And we know that's best practice anyway, but it's really been hard to do that, I'd say, you know, in a comprehensive high school setting. It's been really difficult. And so this is kind of that opportunity to look across the contents and say, what are those skills and abilities that they need to have, that they need to walk away with? And what are the essential learnings across as well?
All right. Other thoughts on that, Kristin? Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you just said, Melissa. I think that's right. From a standards perspective, what I'm concerned about, though, and I would love to hear all of you react to this, is from an equity perspective. We know that there will be, you know, even before the crisis hit in the spring, and you know, I've heard folks in the you know, civil rights community in reference to our Black students say that, you know, they're undergoing double trauma: the trauma of the pandemic and not being in school, and the trauma of the, you know, racial reckoning that this country is going through. And those are the children who are going to come to school in the fall, who are historically have been underserved, who are historically more than 1 or 2 grade levels behind. And I worry if we don't think about how to prioritize what they need to access grade level material, these kids will be just regulated to always being behind. And so I think when it comes to grade level standards, yes, they're all important. But when we think about what are the key prerequisites that need to be filled in order to scaffold them to grade level material, that's where I think we have to be very purposeful and surgical, rather than saying they need these 15 things before I can even put them on grade level material. Now let's pick the 3. What are the 3 things that I can give them remediation on quickly, so they can have access to grade level material? So that would be where I would not contradict what you say, but put an amendment to it.
Paul, how do you think about that?
Wow, there is so much that my colleagues have just said that I think could be hours-long conversations in each of these areas, and from earlier back and coming forward. I think we're going to need to spend some time really mapping out the curriculum for the year, because I think you're absolutely right. We've got so much we have to cover, and we have to look at how we maximize that. An additional concern I have involved with that is the amount of independent learning time that our students are going to have to engage in if we are in a hybrid or a remote learning process. We're going to rely on them so much more to be in charge of their own learning. And that can be a good thing, but that also means, when you talk from the equity perspective, that we know that there are some kids who have so many more resources and so many more abilities to regulate their learning independently. And so how we navigate that is going to be important. So if we need to cover those standards and we need to map all of that out, we have to think about how we can create meaningful, independent types of learning opportunities that help move students forward in the learning process, not just make sure that they don't, that we're reinforcing what they learned the one day they were in school with an in-person person. On top of that, we come back to that social emotional piece that you all spoke about. We need time to build relationships as well. And I'm very, very worried about that. If we start in either of these modes, remote or hybrid, the amount of time that we spend with relationships with our staff members is critical to the success of our students as well. Before all of this happened, we were looking at our students' social emotional factors. And assessments, that mental health assessments we were giving our students, were showing that our students were seeing more depression and anxiety than ever before prior to this whole outbreak. And we were looking at how we as a staff could be more connected to our students in meaningful ways so that we could help work on those issues. And now we're starting a school year, and it's entirely possible that we start it with someone like Lauren, who should be engaged in meaningful ways with their students in class, now trying to find ways to create those relationships with them virtually for an extended period of time. And how do we how do we look at those subtleties? How do I know when my student's not having a good day? How do I know when they're confused, when they're anxious, if I've never met them in person and gotten to know their personalities in that deep way? So couple all of that together, and there's so much that everyone said that I like I said, overwhelms me with the concern. And I just wish I had the answers that could make this magically all work.
So before I ask my last question, then we go to Eric, because I know he's got Q&A. I want to put in a plug for not doing office hours. And I know a lot of schools have done it, and it's this technique, right? And it may be just the experience that my kids had. But we would sort of make them go into office hours this year. And of course, it was so hard this year at the beginning, and I put nothing on, it's no blame on teachers. But they would come back and they would be like, Mom, Dad, there were two of us on there, nobody said anything, and it ended after a couple minutes. And it's this idea that the teachers kind of set up this time to do the interaction and all that, but then it's just kind of dead time. So I also think there may be some bad ways or some ineffective ways, just because folks don't know how to do it yet, of trying to create these relationships and individualize instruction. So speed round, before we go to Eric. All the stuff you said requires a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of decision making. Like, in some ways we have to slow down in order to speed up, but everything around us is like, we got to do it. The orientation is that we have to get everything done quickly. Who should be at the forefront of making these kinds of systems decisions? Because you're describing a lot of decisions that teachers would make on a daily level, but then there are larger quasi-policy decisions, larger systemic decisions. Who needs to be making these decisions so that we can actually do what you're describing in terms of making sure we have solid standards that people are attending to, and that we're assessing kids well and adjusting instruction with always through the equity lens? So who needs to be at the forefront of making those decisions?
I can jump in with probably an answer everyone on this call could guess. Teachers should be at the forefront of all of that. I mean, I will say, even in my own district, teachers have not been involved in thinking about the scheduling. I've been involved at the state level and at my school. So teachers know, to Paul's point, we know the realities of what's going on in our classroom, the challenges of the day-to-day. So whether that's thinking about what assessments are in place, whether that's thinking about what type of scheduling you're having, whether that's thinking about what sort of standards or essential learning you're prioritizing, to make those decisions in a vacuum without teachers, I think is malpractice. I mean, we can't ask them to live out something that they have not been able to bring their expertise to the table for.
So Josh, I guess I could also speak to, jumping off what Lauren said, speak to what we've actually been doing. You're asking who's making those decisions. So I can say what we've been doing in our district. And so we created a COVID planning team, if you will. I hate the name, but we've had, and it's a representation of administrators and teachers. And it's a group of about 14 or 15 of us that have actually been meeting in person with our masks on and socially distanced. And we've been working for months trying to unpack a lot of this. But then we've also then taken it on the road. I've done, I think, 4 town halls in the last 6 days with parents and staff. This morning's with staff. At 9 o'clock, I was meeting. We had almost 200 staff members who were joining the town hall, and we were talking, and it's a chance for question and answer and for us to vet. This is what we've come up with so far. This is what we're thinking. Share with us what you're thinking about that. Because you can't bring everybody to the table and have a productive meeting with, we have almost 300 staff members in the district, but they need to have a voice. So you have some people who are hopefully representing the staff well, and then you bring that back out to vet it with them. And we've been doing the same thing with town halls with parents at the various grade levels and hearing what they have to say. And I have to say, from those town halls, we've made a lot of changes from what we originally thought was going to be our best model, and readjusted that so that as we move forward, hopefully everybody's voice has been heard and people will feel like they're able to jump in and do what we need to do.
Yeah, that's great. Other thoughts, Melissa or Kristin?
I was just going to add on to what Paul said. In California right now, our districts have to, or all of our LEAs have to write a plan, and for that plan, they have to proactively get input from all the people Paul listed, as well as students, community groups, specific parent groups, like parent groups for English learners. really engaging the community in developing this plan. And so I think also keeping in mind the student voice, because, you know, we're seeing a lot of schedules coming out that are like 7 hours straight for teachers on Zoom and 4 hours straight for students. I mean, things that are just not developmentally sound. But also a lot of us adults are on these meetings all day and we're not pleasant people afterwards or during sometimes. So, you know, just thinking about what's also appropriate developmentally or just physiologically while we're trapped in these spaces together. And then also, I think content experts, you know, helping people who have that larger view of the standards and all of those pieces, who can just take that time to do some of this work for teachers, to take some of this off their plate and help arrange some of this. Because that's what my colleagues have been doing in our curriculum and instruction team, and creating units, all of these resources, because teachers just don't have time. You know, there's too much else.
And then Chris will go to you, but I think a lot about central office and central office transformation work. And it seems to me like this is when central office leaders need to be stepping up and proving their mettle with exactly what you're describing. And there's a huge lift for them. And I don't know that they're being seen in that way by a lot of folks. But Kristin, I want you to just jump in and then we'll go to the Q&A.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's related to what my colleagues on the panel just said, that we have to have teachers and parents at the table in figuring out these plans. And I agree wholeheartedly with what Lauren said, that if we don't, then it's malpractice. We have to. One thing I did want to share is that, and I don't mean to come across as Pollyanna, but we have been talking to some schools around the country who are predominantly have high poverty, high minority, and they did a fantastic job in the spring. And as we dig into why, it's because they had a strong culture in their school and already had strong relationships with their students and their families prior to COVID. And these stories are run counter to the narrative that's out there that everything's so terrible and so horrible. They're out there. It can be done if adults are making the right decisions, and adults, especially our teachers and parents, are being supported. The kids, the kids can be all right if the adults in the community and in the virtual room are making the right decisions. And so I just wanted to kind of end on a positive note before we went into the Q&A.
I think that's right. And you know, from my perspective as a former superintendent, it seems like there are a couple of things. One, maximum transparency leads to maximum engagement. And if you can work with your community to make these, and say, look, I don't know, right? We don't know. We're going to figure it out, is key. And then I guess the other piece of the pressure on leaders to make these decisions is, you know, look, the superintendent of the district in Georgia where the girl filmed it and it went viral, right? See all those kids coming back, is getting death threats, right? I mean, like the pressure on leaders is so huge that they sometimes become afraid to say, I don't know, or let's involve people in it. And it's hard to involve people in it, yet the time to do that is more so, you know, now is the time to do that more so than ever. But trying to balance that is so hard. But there are examples, and oftentimes it is in the schools that have been designated, you know, low performing or in need of improvement, that we see some of the best examples of culture that can be built on in this time. So Eric is back, which means it's time for Q&A, right? So Eric, you're on mute though.
Yeah, I'm taking my mute off. Thank you, first of all, for everyone in this talk. As Paul said at one point, it feels like each of these could be a springboard to hours of discussion. And I know in all of your respective spaces, that's what you're all doing around the clock. And so that we got to touch on them a little bit. And kind of one of the things we always say at Research Ed if you come to one of our live events, it's very much like, this is not the be all end all. Okay, this is to learn some of these faces. This is to learn some of these personalities, some of these bodies of expertise that we can follow for a while and perhaps continue to get good ideas and then network. So I hope for everybody tuning in, it's been a useful, the little snowball that becomes the big snowball. I have a couple of questions, and very much to Melissa's point about just how much time we can spend online and still respect ourselves. I had 3 5-hour PDs in 3 consecutive days a couple weeks ago, and I was like, note that as I plan my synchronous business for kids coming up. But I had kind of 2 questions. We have about 10 minutes, so we can take them apart however we want. But there are 2 that I wanted to explore in a little more detail. Just given all of everybody's experiences and in your planning and as you think ahead, there will still be some people out there who want something kind of prepared and standardized as a formative dipstick, okay? No matter how, it may not fit into plans, as Paul suggested, and sorry, I very much appreciate it. That's really what they want. Okay, maybe their formative assessment game isn't all that great, and they do want something off the shelf. It just helps them. Would anyone recommend anything that they're seeing out there? Okay, is there anything that's particularly sound in terms of a survey instrument, in terms of some sort of reading screener or anything like? I think if we could just kind of throw some things out that what you've seen that would be potentially useful for your setting and why, I think people could just really use the suggestions.
Who wants to take that on?
Well, I saw that one of the questions was speaking to the social emotional piece, so I can just share what we've been working on. I know that there's a number of free assessments out there. CORE has one coming out that takes into account some of what's occurred during COVID, and I help give feedback, so I can say that I think the questions are good. And then different places like a lot of the resources in Castle and their assessment work group, Washoe County and Reno has done amazing work in Nevada around social emotional learning. But I'm going to get back to the whole thing is what decisions are you trying to make? So for us, we're helping folks try to make decisions about how to have kind of interventions for the social emotional piece with specific students. And so what do you need to know about those students each day, each week, to be able to provide those supports and interventions? I'll let someone else talk to the academic because I'm not allowed to promote anything specific.
Yeah. I should recuse myself from this question, but I just want to underscore, look at the reports. Are the reports, because that's the thing, right? That's the thing that you're buying, is what evidence, what information does the assessment give you? And does it support the types of interpretations that you as an instructor need to make in this context? Does it help you make those types of surgical decisions that you need to make about where to focus your precious time? And if the answer is, not so much, that's your answer. And I think Melissa, it was you. You had that great phrase that you stole from Dylan that I've already forgotten, but it was perfect. And one way to figure out the answer to that is look at the reports. What do the reports tell you about what the student knows and can do, and how to close the gap on where they need help to access grade level material?
Decision-driven data collection. Paul or Lauren, just real quick, are there anything specific tools either of you guys are using in your classroom or in your district around the academic pieces that you think are solid?
Well, I like all of the tools that were mentioned before. We happen to have moved into MAPS in our district, and we're looking at ways to see how we can bring that forward this year as we start the school year. But I would say even more important, because I agree with everything that's said about what is it telling us and what do we need to know. For us, we really need to know where the gaps are for learning for our students, to catch them up individually and to design our instruction and map out what curriculum we need to cover to try to maximize all of that. And so a few years back, when our evaluation tool got modified in the state, part of that was to look at student performance and find a way to measure how teachers were helping students to grow during the course of the year. So this kind of growth factor. And so a lot of work was done in the districts regarding creating almost pre-test, post-test kinds of scenarios. And so I think our teachers have already created some really great assessments that help them at the beginning of the year to kind of see where students are at as they enter into the classroom. And I think that we need to give them a little bit more time to modify those so that they're going to give them the introductory information they need to help guide that learning process. And I think those are going to be much more authentic because they meet directly with what the teachers are supposed to be teaching, and they've already been designed to measure that both pre and post. So I think that's probably where we're going to spend most of our time over the next few weeks developing those.
The more modification, less purchasing. What about Lauren? Any thoughts on that?
I would echo. I think in my experience, some ready-made, out-of-the-box formative instruments, in Kristin's words, have been meh for me. So I don't have anything that I would recommend. But to Paul's point, what comes to mind is actually that this is where PLCs can be really powerful as tools, right? That if we are making formative assessments based on our students and our situation and our school schedule, whatever, that's going to become a powerful tool. And it's going to Paul's point, it's going to cut down teacher workload if we're collaboratively making common formative assessments that are truly tailored to our situation. I think that's going to be, even though that takes more time, I think that's going to be better bang for the buck than trying to find a ready-made out of the box.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for everybody's perspective on that. And I do hope that gives us, the folks who asked, like some good starting points to consider as they figure out if they need something off the shelf, and maybe the names of some good things academically and social emotionally. The last thing I want to ask, and we have right about 4 minutes, so time is tight, and then we'll just kind of outro, is coming back to students. Lindsay Turk, attendee, asked if anyone is seeing exemplary ways to accommodate and provide for those students that definitely do need some extra time. I know the school I'm just going to use the school I work at in our hybrid model, and I'm based in Minnesota. One of the things we're talking about right now is really trying to capitalize on the power of tutoring and to maybe use Wednesdays, which is, in a way, it was starting to emerge as as kind of a blank day, like almost like a work catch-up day, and business will be conducted Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, whatever. But we're trying to like activate that space as a time where we can actually coordinate tutoring to really work in small groups. And I'm just wondering, that's one of the ways we're trying to crack that nut. But I don't know, is anybody else seeing interesting and novel ideas that could be mobilized fairly quickly and efficiently in schools?
I think we're actually using the phone. And I'm not sure if this is the answer to the question that you're asking, but we want to make sure that all of our students are engaged. And so we've created in the spring a database so that teachers could immediately let us know if they had a student within their classes that was not engaging to the level that they expected. And then in addition to them doing their best to try to engage those students, our administrators were jumping in ways they hadn't before to reach out. And we were utilizing our guidance departments and our social workers and all of those people to reach out to the families and to do that personal kind of connection to say, what's going on? How can we help you more? Is it about technology accessibility? Is it about, behavioral, struggling to help your child behave and to comply and to do what they need to do? What are the issues that you're struggling with so that your child, or asking the student directly when they're older, what is it that's preventing you from accessing this? And then tailoring it accordingly, trying to link them with the resources we need.
Yeah, and I would add on to that. I did some of that. I did some phone school with kids. I would get them on the phone and we're walking through assignments and they're reading their essay to me out loud and we're working on that. But I also found home visits a marvelously powerful tool. And we did them even during fourth quarter. We stayed on the porch and we're masked and distanced, but the kids would bring their Chromebooks out to the porch and I'm showing them through the screen and we're talking through things. So those efforts at personal connection, I think, are really powerful. But I also think, from a sort of a more instructional standpoint, the fear about kids getting behind, and then, you know, then they get more behind, and they're more behind, especially in sort of sequential subjects that are less spiraled. I think, and we didn't talk too much about this, but I think this is where formative assessment practice really, really helps, right? Is that if students really understand the learning progression that they are on, that can help them see how getting this skill, right, is then fundamental to follow-up skills and their so on and so forth, and can help give some direction to that, and can help teachers identify in a day, okay, these 6 kids in my class are not getting differential equations or whatever it is, so that that quick intervention and that quick reaction, whether it's phone, home visit, small group setting, tutoring, I think that that's sort of an instructional practice that can undergird the question as a whole.
I'll say one other piece of advice. Oh, sorry, Josh.
No, please.
I was just going to say, from the instructional side, one other piece of advice I've seen pop up quite a bit, because we're supposed to be supporting everyone, so I'm researching pretty much everything right now, is in your classes, your Zoom classes, or whatever platform you use, keep the breakout groups the same. Keep students together, keep it consistent. They can build relationships. They can also support each other in some ways, and that way you have a better idea of, you know, you can pop into these groups, provide additional supports, but, you know, keep it the same, keep it consistent, and that's good for both the teacher and the student as well.
Mm-hmm. So Eric, it's 2. So we're going to wrap up?
Yeah, I think so. With that, I would love to thank you all one more time. Josh, Lauren, Kristin, Melissa, and Paul. Thank you so much for your time, for volunteering your wisdom, expertise, recommendations, and kind of passing on some of the things that you're you know, gleaning either from your context or from the research you're doing or your, you know, long careers. Really appreciate that you will share with our community. Everybody in Research Ed, thank you so much for tuning in, whether you are watching the recording or you've been able to attend live. Make sure to follow these folks, and I can tell you firsthand that they are very generous. So I'm setting that up. Y'all are going to start getting emails. You're going to start getting emails wondering how they can get your direct support. So with that said, I'm about to hit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
well,
you, Eric.
geez.
Keep up the great work. Thank you, everybody, for doing this with me. Really, really appreciate it. All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Record is going off.
All right. Thanks all. Take care. Appreciate it.